Okay, well, I'm going to try to film here. Let me pull this away from me just a bit. I've kind of come up with a way here to do this. I'm in the middle, literally almost I can say, in the middle of a stream. And to show you what I mean here, let me turn this around so I can see it. Back off here a little bit. I'll have to, as you can see, surrounded me. Right over there is where I came from. Kind of hopped across there, and it's bigger over here, so I'm not quite in the middle. I'm closer to one edge than the other, or I wouldn't be out here. There's a big rock here people have done some spray painting on. But I am right here in the middle of the stream, or like I say, between the shores, I'll put it that way, between the banks of the stream. And right there, you see that, it's kind of a walking stick I've made, and this rock is where I'm going to put the camera to be on me, and I hope, I played around with it just a second ago, hope it still is going to I'm going to be able to do this with a bit of ease and to be able to film me. Also, right up there is the road, so if a car comes by, there was a big truck that came by just a moment ago, made a lot of noise. So if some car comes by, maybe a lot of noise that gets made. But this is, before I do anything, I just want to show how green it looks out here. It's the first time I've done a little bit of filming on some of these, but since the leaves have come back on the tree, some of the videos I'd made before, they were still leafless, and now spring is definitely here. What was dead has come to life. So you see a few places are still empty, but mostly it's all kind of green now. And we have had some rain, so the creek is up a little bit. Although actually it hadn't, well, yeah, it did rain last night a little bit, but it's kind of just lifted it up to a little bit of where it was before. It had been down some. So the hard part for me is going to be getting back across whenever I'm done here. But I'm not parked too far from here, so if I get my feet wet, it's not that big of a deal. But at any rate, that's a little introduction. Just wanted to show you where I was, where I'm filming from here before I start doing this. And now I'm going to set the camera down here. And I hope my voice is carrying. The reason I have that stick, by the way, the reason I decided to bring it out here was one never knows when you're in the water when a snake may appear somewhere. They have been known to be around here. And you may see me looking around occasionally to make sure there's not one closing up on me. I don't believe they would. Water moccasin obviously would be what I would be fearing. I don't think he would actually come up to bite me, but I do want to have something just in case. And I'm not wanting to kill any animal like that, but I do want to keep them at a distance from me, and so that we both will be happy that way. But I don't think that's going to be a problem, but better safe than sorry. Well, what I want to read something from the New Testament today, and probably what I would have put in the title can tell a little bit of what this is about, is talk a little bit. Now I haven't done one of these videos in a while where I've sort of talked about various what I'm kind of calling my statement of faith, if you will, things I believe. I've done some devotionals over Easter season. I've done some other devotionals here and there about different things, but getting back to what I would go in sort of a statement of faith. And you know, when I get finished with this, probably in a few years, or I finally get around to doing all of them, I'll maybe put them in a category all by themselves, a group type category. I forget exactly how you call that on YouTube, but may do that so that you can see them all one after the other. But the last time I talked about the fall of man, and a little bit about what that resulted in and man's disobedience and all that. But I kind of want to look today at something that's related to that, sort of the next thing on that, and that is what we would call what's commonly referred to as the Doctrine of Original Sin. Now, there's a lot of different views on the doctrine of original sin. And I can't cover all of them, but you can read a lot of them. But where this is based from in the Bible is in the book of Romans, Paul's epistle to the Romans, and chapter 5. And you can read the whole chapter, but I just want to read a little bit of it, starting in verse 12. He says, "Therefore, just as through one man," which means Adam, "just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all have sinned." It says, "For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin was not imputed when there was no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned, according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. But the free gift is not like the offense. For if by, for if by the one man's offense many died, much more by the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abound to many. And the gift is not like that which came through the one who sinned. For judgment which came through the one offense resulted in condemnation, but the free gift which came from many offenses resulted in justification. For if by the one man's offense death reigned through the one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ." Now the next verse, verse 18, I think is the verse I want to focus on the most. "Therefore, as through one man's offense judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation, even so through one man's righteous act the free gift came to all men, resulting in the justification of life." And verse 19, I'll read it too. It says, "For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so also by one man's obedience many will be made righteous." So the idea is what we commonly are talking about in these verses, is how sin was transferred, or to use a fancy word, it's often used, imputed, from Adam to Adam's descendants. And somehow the idea is here, because of what he said in this, "Therefore, as through one man's offense judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation." We'll stop there on that. The idea there being that we are all condemned because of the sin of Adam. So the idea is, how can I be condemned because of what somebody else did? How can somebody else's crime result in my condemnation? Which would mean we would use it in America at least, the idea of me being adjudicated as being guilty because of something somebody else did. And especially, we might say, the idea if we have a just judge and a just jury and so forth, and they know all the facts. Now, people have been accused, obviously, of doing things that someone else did. They're found guilty of it. But the idea on that is, that was a miscarriage of justice. The people didn't know that they weren't guilty. In this case, the idea is that God's holding us guilty. God's declaring us to be guilty for the sin that somebody else did that he knows we didn't do. If this is to be understood the way Paul says this, "Therefore, as through one man's offense judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation. Adam's sin resulting in the condemnation of all people." But yet Adam was the only one who sinned. They're not judged, they're not considered guilty for their own sin, but because of the sin of Adam. So the idea is, of original sin, is that in some way we are all guilty of that sin. In some way, all of humanity is guilty of the sin of Adam. And there's different theories on how that goes. One is the idea of what's commonly called sometimes it's called the federal headship. We think of a federal government as being a representative government, especially in the United States. It's the idea that Adam was our representative. He spoke for us, and that Adam was a perfect representative. And because he was the perfect representative of us, his sin passes on to us. In other words, the idea is, because he was the perfect representative for us, none of us would have done any better than he did. We all sinned, and none of us can claim, well, if we had been there, we would not have sinned. No, we all would have. That sin that Adam did passes on to all of us because he represented us perfectly. What he did is exactly what we would have done had we been in the same situation. So there's that idea that he is a representative. It's more of a legal idea. Excuse me, it's more of a legal idea of what Adam did, is that he was the legal representative for us. We weren't actually there eating of the fruit of the tree in disobedience to the command of God, but that we would have done the same thing because none of us could have done it any better than what he did. Another view is what's commonly called the natural headship view. It's actually called by a few other names as well, but this is one the most common name for it that I know of is called the natural headship view, and it says that all of humanity was in Adam, that all of us were somehow in the person of Adam, and that through Adam's action, that sin, that we all sinned there, that we were there with him. In other words, the same as the federal headship view. It says we would have done the same thing. Well, in this case, it's not just we would have done the same thing, but we did do the same thing. That we were there in Adam, willfully doing the same thing that he did. And therefore, we are all judged guilty not because he was our representative, excuse me, but because we actually were there doing it along with it. Now, both views have their strong points and we could say their weak points, and they're both sort of ways of trying to understand this. But however one understands it, we were somehow in Adam, whether as a representative or literally in the sense of a biological sort of way in Adam, sort of in a realistic way. Sometimes that view of what I call the natural headship is sometimes called the realistic view, because the idea is we really were in Adam, not just symbolically or representatively, but really we were in Adam. Regardless of which one we say, the idea is that man has inherited Adam's, not just his guilt, but we actually inherited the sin. We inherited the guilt because we inherited the sin, because we're just as guilty of it as he was. Now, some will obviously object to that. As I said, the idea that if I were there, I wouldn't have done that. Well, that kind of shows a very selfish attitude, a very self-centered, a very egotistical attitude that says, the perfect man who was put in the perfect environment, I would have done better than he did. When we know, all of us know, sort of intrinsically, we've all messed up. We've all committed our own sins. And we know if we were, that was actually the postman. I see him up here a lot. We all know that we have made our own mistakes, and given the same situation, we actually would have done the same thing. We would have disobeyed. Some people admittedly love to say they would have disobeyed. Some people try to pretend they wouldn't, but nonetheless, we exactly would have. Jesus, as a matter of fact, in a related thing, said to the religious leaders of his day, you say if we had been alive at the time of our fathers, we wouldn't have treated the prophets the way they did. He said, in reality, you're just as bad as your fathers, if not worse. He says, and he talks about, and this is in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, he's getting up to the point of telling them what they're going to do to him. He says, you've done the same thing. He says, and all the blood from Abel to Zechariah will fall on this generation. He says, you're going to sum up essentially the sins and the iniquities of your fathers. What they did, you're going to do the exact same thing. In fact, you're going to do worse. So the idea is, in the same way that with Adam being our head, whether a representative head or an actual, for lack of a better way of saying it, natural or realistic head, we all would have done the exact same thing excuse me, that Adam did. And thus, we all inherit his guilt. Now, there is one thing that I want to, this is not often spoke of, but I will say this is one thing that is often overlooked in this, but we will note Adam is the one who is held responsible for the sin. But we will note, if you know Genesis chapter 3, he was not the one who did the first sin. He wasn't the first one to sin, he was the second. The woman, she wasn't called Eve at the time, but she would be called Eve later. She was the first one who sinned. And she is, I guess in a sense, held responsible for her own sin. But Adam is really the one who's judged for sinning. He was, in that sense, the head. And it's through him that the sin comes. It's not through Eve. She's judged in the sense she's the one person that Adam's sin was not imputed to, because it didn't need to be. She had already sinned. But also her sin is not considered to be passed on to anyone else. It comes through Adam. And it's worth noting also the Hebrew, the word Adam is Adam. Ha-Adam means the man. It's through the man that sin comes. It's through the man that sin passes along. Which explains also something very important later on. There's one human birth in history that did not require a man for the conception. There's one human that came about without the aid of a human male. And that was the Lord Jesus Christ himself. It explains also the importance there of the virgin birth. Why that was important that no human male was involved with it. Obviously there was obviously there was a miraculous nature of it, but there was also a necessity of it, because Jesus did not inherit sin from Adam. He is not guilty of the sin of Adam. Yet we know, of course, and we'll see something to talk about later, he will take on the guilt as a sin offering of the sin of Adam, but he did not naturally or representatively, either way, inherit the sin of Adam. But the rest of us do, and it affects us. It has that effect on us, primarily that it makes us guilty before God as sinners. So I wanted to talk about that today, just to get on to that, and I may talk about this in some upcoming videos as well, a little bit more on it, and then hopefully move on to other things, to other views. I hope to do these a little more often. And if you're seeing this, it means that my voice was able to record well enough to where you could hear it above all the water that's here around you. Hopefully it's hearing. If not, I will have to record this later. But if you're seeing this, obviously I didn't. So at this point, I'm going to pick the camera back up here. Knock